Women Warriors. It is me, Susie Pettit, and I have a guest on the show today, my friend and colleague, Elizabeth Cush. She goes by Biz Cush. So Biz is a licensed clinical professional counselor. She's a women's life coach and a business owner in Annapolis, Maryland. She's also the host of Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast. As a coach, she helps midlife women who feel overwhelmed and unfulfilled embrace and embody their inner wise woman so that they can fully enjoy the beautiful life they've created. Sounds like she's helping women live lives they love. So I loved having her on the show today. We dove into parts work, or the internal family systems, which is something that I use in my coaching and that fascinates me as a coach and helps me also individually. So I'm thrilled to bring this body of knowledge to you if you're not familiar with it yet, or to dive a bit deeper if you are. Let's go. All right, and welcome, Biz, to the Love Your Life show. Thanks for coming on today.
Oh, Susie, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate, just this connection, and I'm excited to talk to you today.
Great. Well, I briefly was talking to you before we started that I have been listening to your podcast for a very long time. And so it is just a wonderful full circle moment to bring you on to share your expertise with the Love Your Life show listeners and all around the world. So I am thrilled to have you on. And if no one has heard of you before, could you give us just a brief summary of how you got to be doing what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I am a therapist, a life coach for highly sensitive women, and uh, I'm a podcaster like you, as you said. I host the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast, which used to be called the Woman Warriors podcast. And um, I'm a late bloomer, so I went back to grad school when I was 50, I think is when I started to, I knew at that time my kids were older, and I really wanted to, psychology had just kind of grabbed me when I was trying to raise my children in a mentally healthy way. So
Mhm.
for them and for me, and really knew that I wanted to be a therapist, but with my own children in their own journeys with education and the costs, it took a while for me to actually um, complete my master's, but did it and then jumped into therapy. And now I'm doing life coaching too.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that part of your story that you were, 50 and beyond, as it's just, it doesn't matter. Like, we need to get over our thoughts about what's possible for us. And
It's so
yeah.
true. It's so true, because I think we can get so stuck in the I'm too old, or I can't, it's too late for me. But obviously I was fortunate enough that, the financial piece wasn't that hard. It was a challenge, but it didn't get in the way of me
Mm,
going ahead
mm.
with getting my education and becoming a therapist. So,
Yeah, which
yeah.
is lovely. So I think this is a great segue. One of the things I wanted you to talk to us about today is internal family systems, and sort of
Mhm.
parts work is, I think, how some of us know of it. And I
Yeah.
know for me, when I am going, thinking of a new goal, or, no matter my age, and right now I'm 51, but if I'm thinking of doing something new, I have these different, I call them voices in my head that come up
Yes.
and have different opinions on my goals. And so
Sure,
I
sure.
would love if you could tell us a little about, like, what even is internal family systems.
Yeah. So internal family systems was developed, created, whatever, came about from the founder's name is Dick Schwartz. And he was working with clients, I think, that had eating disorders, I'm pretty sure. And realized that within their struggles, there were parts of them that would actually uh, encourage them to binge eat or to withhold food. And so, because he came from a very family systems orientation of therapy, he started working with those parts of people, like as if almost like they were the clients, those parts that were wounded. But I have been trained just in the level one. It's very hard to get into the trainings for IFS, but I've also done a lot of consultation and sort of side trainings to kind of keep up, and my own therapy, personal therapy. My therapist is an IFS therapist too. So really doing a lot of my own work with the parts.
Mhm.
So the idea is we all have different parts of us, and the parts all have good intentions. It's just sometimes those intentions have gone astray, right? So say, mm, and oftentimes the reason they go astray or because or they get overly activated, it's because there's a wound behind that part, right? So like we talk about inner child work, and really working with those wounded parts can help heal our whole system. And the
Mm.
idea is that they all have good intentions, even if sometimes it doesn't feel like that. Like sometimes our inner critic can be pretty mean and terrible to us, or if we struggle with an eating disorder, or if there are parts of us that use substances, it's harder to see the good intention there. And the idea is that through developing our self energy, that we all have self energy, through developing that self energy, we can learn to relate to these parts, all of them, with compassion and kindness and curiosity, versus like, I know for a long time, my inner critical part, I would just be like, oh, I just wish it would just shut up, right? Just go away.
Mm.
Versus like, what if I listened to it? What if I got to
Mhm.
know it? What if I could better understand what its intentions were and what drives it, so that then I could heal what was happening underneath that?
Mm.
Because, um, does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense, and that is
Yeah.
parts work has been really helpful for me, and interestingly, the way that I coach, I'm constantly trying to help clients see like the difference between just reality, like facts, sort of like the sun is rising, and our thoughts, like it's a
Yeah.
miserable day because I have to be in the office all day and I can't be outside with the sun, and just sort of separating out from that, and the freedom that comes from that. And I have found that same freedom with parts work, and recognizing that maybe I do have a goal, and maybe there's a voice in my head, and in the IFS system, it's a part that is trying to
Mhm.
keep me safe, that is saying, no, Susie, you can't do that, like that's not possible for you. Or
Yeah.
and it's,
Exactly.
yeah, it's like throwing these grenades in my path. And what I like about your work is how you bring self-compassion into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I do find that when I can see that with the parts work, and I can see like, oh, okay, that's the little me who had a dad who told her women aren't good at business. And so this part is trying to protect me because it truly believes women aren't good at business. And
Yes.
so,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think, like, when we can bring that sort of more compassionate side of us in, but
Mhm.
also recognize like this is just a part, right? Like we have lots of parts, but this isn't all of me. Like we
Mhm.
talked earlier, like uh I used to say I'm an anxious woman, and now I say I have an anxious part that sometimes gets
Mm.
activated. I've done a lot of work around managing my anxiety and trying to help me better understand what drives it, but I still have it. That part is still there, and it will still show up. And it takes sometimes some extra compassion on my part to not just be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm still dealing with this
Yeah.
anxiety, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Someone, and maybe it was in his book, that I have right here under my computer on parts work, but, or it was an interview I heard where they talked about it sort of like a boardroom table, and how you have all these parts sitting around the table. So you might have the anxious part, and you might have the scared inner child, you have all these parts, and they all can have a say, but they're not the head of the table. And that helps
Yeah,
me when I'm in it.
yeah,
To just
yeah,
to be calmer about it. Like, so the anxious part comes up, and I'm not like, oh, she's here, like the day is ruined. It's like, oh, I hear you. It's
yeah,
all right. Yeah. So how do you
yes.
work with parts work and with anxiety? Like, how does how do you see that in your office, or how do you help people with that?
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of for me, what I have come to recognize with clients and with myself too, because I do have anxiety, I do have an anxious part, um, is that oftentimes anxiety is driven by how we've managed these parts in the past. So by pushing them away, telling them to be quiet. I know a lot of my clients are very good at sort of compartmentalizing difficult stuff. So, it's all in a box back here, but those boxes want to break open, right? Those parts want to be heard and seen. And that can feel really scary because there's probably almost all the time other parts saying, oh, no, 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 that needs to stay in the box.
Mhm.
That has to,
That's not
we
safe.
can't, it's too scary, right? Yeah. We don't know what'll happen if we open up that box or that, whatever, that portal that, if we look too closely. And so the anxiety is driven by almost these contradictory, like the younger wounded part wanting to be heard and the other part saying, shut it down, shut it down. And
Mm-hmm.
so that creates sort of the, like polarization within
Yeah.
us of like, how do we handle this? So it is just slowing the process down and really better understanding what's kind of happening underneath it.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess one of the terms that also comes up with parts work is the protector. And that
Yeah.
helps me certainly with anxiety when I'm noticing like anxiety is present, and I can just, like, I'm not anxious about my anxiety. Like it's like, oh, okay, anxiety is here. It's here to protect me. It is, I can say, I've got this now. Like, you can stand down. This is
Yeah.
normal fear as I'm taking a growth step forward.
Yes.
Using that
Yes.
self-compassionate, kind voice.
Well, and especially if there's trauma involved, right? Like to be able to, because oftentimes the parts that are wounded are behaving as if the trauma is happening right now because they don't know. They haven't healed. They think we're still whatever age we might have been when the trauma happened. And so a lot of that sort of mindfulness piece of like, oh, I'm here, I'm in my life, I'm safe
Mm.
as far as I know, I'm safe
Right.
in this moment. And that's not happening right now. And two, I can come back to you and help you heal at some point when I'm feeling like I have the space to do that.
Very nice. Yeah. How do
Yeah.
you either use parts work, or how do you just address sort of the inner critic in your practice? Or
Yeah. Well, again, like you said, it's a very protective part, right?
Mm,
So it's driven by typically like it doesn't want us to get hurt. So, in your example, like, if, well, and I can use my own example, but like if you did have a father that said women aren't good at business and should never even try. And, if you do, you're going to fail. Well, of course, a part of you is going to think like, oh my gosh, if I really do try this and I fail, what is that going to feel like? So you
mm-hmm,
better not stay
mm-hmm,
away. You don't know what you're doing. You'll never figure it out, whatever it is your inner critic says. But by, like I said, just really sort of, you can really almost have a conversation with that part to
yeah.
say, like, all right, what is the fear if I do? Because oftentimes these protective parts have like a job, and their
Mm,
job is to keep whatever that is, to keep you from getting hurt because you're going to try something new, or to feel what it felt like when your dad said, Don't do that. Like, you
mm-hmm,
can't win, you can't
mm-hmm,
succeed." Um, so many of what those protectors are protecting is not getting wounded again the way you did
mm-hmm.
from that original wound.
For
Yeah.
sure. And so for and I'm fine using my particular circumstance, which is that case. My dad consistently said women are not good in business. Women shouldn't be in business. Women don't know what
Yeah.
they're doing in business, like at least once a week. So that was like heavy programming for me
Yeah.
growing up. And so now that I'm in business, I will hear that part of me when I'm trying to, move to a next level. sort of push up
Yeah.
and that, be that inner critical, like, oh, you can't do this, like, and
Yeah.
it even can be in my father's voice. So I just want to share that with listeners, because the more aware we can get of it, the more sort of compassion and space we have to manage the part.
Yes.
What I would
Yes.
love to talk to is, I think they're called firefighters, or like, so say I don't have that space, that the inner critic is coming out. Like, I've heard of firefighters, or maybe I'm just totally botching that with parts work.
No, you're absolutely
did that
right.
show up
Yep.
in this situation?
Yeah. So the firefighters are like basically like extreme protectors, right? They get called in or jump in when they like basically a fire alarm is going off. They're like, holy crap, the pain is coming. I can see it. Like the critic didn't work. The inner critic didn't stop you from going forward with this plan. And she's not prepared. She can't do it. She might get hurt. And so they are extreme in that they will do whatever they can to stop you from feeling that pain, right? Stop you from rewounding that wound. And they can be well, it can be substance use, right? Because that numbs, so drinking too much or smoking too much or whatever your drug of choice is. It could be eating. It could be totally just disengaging. Like you get to a place where you just want to crawl in your bed and pull the covers over your head because it just all feels so overwhelming. This part says it's time to shut it all down. We can't do anything else other than scroll our phone or sit in a corner or binge a television show you've seen 20 times before, right? Because its job is to numb, right? The firefighter's job is basically to cut you off from how painful it could be, or
I
it
guess
thinks it's going to be.
Firefighter is more like a behavior, almost, it sounds like a part that comes up with the behavior, like, so say I'm taking a step in my business and I'm, not listening to the inner critic, then the firefighter suddenly is like procrastination or overeating or over drinking or over shopping, or like the overs that don't help us, or the
Yeah.
or the other side of the napping or the screw it, nothing, and I just don't take any steps forward. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it's like you think about like literally like a fire, right? It's like the firefighters come in and want to burn it all down. I mean, even though like it's like a fire alarm going off inside you, it's also just like, let's just torch this to the ground so you don't have to feel whatever it is you're feeling.
Yeah, I'm thinking of another example that maybe some of the listeners would resonate with. Like, so I have a lot of parents on here who have anxious children, and so if their child comes home from school and says something like, Louise wouldn't sit with me at lunch today, and so the parent has a part that is very nervous and feeling like they want to step in and control, and they don't slow that down. I think the firefighter there would be like, call Louise's mom. Like, it's like the over functioning, like the over.
Absolutely. It can be anger, right? It could also be rage, right? I'm gonna,
yeah. Right. Like
And
big, right. I like that sort of the firefighter, like, I guess obviously that's where they get their term, but this like, oh no, this can't go down.
yeah, exactly. And I think what is lovely about the model, again, of internal family system or parts work, is that even that firefighter's job, or, even though as extreme as they can be, their intentions are good. Like they want to protect you. They are the extreme protectors. And I think that can be a really hard piece for it's not how we look at mental illness. It is not how we look at, because it could be depression, right? It could be suicidal thoughts. It could be very extreme, substance use to the extreme. So our sort of societal message around these protectors is get rid of them.
Yeah.
They need to stop versus.
Well, even shame, right? Like, yeah, because if a firefighter comes in and Like say
Yes.
instead of doing my whatever I'm going to do for my business, I decide to drink all night, you know, and the next morning, the voice that is programmed in my head would be shame instead of like, oh, Susie, let's look at why that protector came in. You know?
Exactly.
Right.
That's 100% right. Yep. We
Or
load the
yelling
guilt
at our
and the
kids. I mean,
shame.
yeah. And then we don't change when we're shaming, but it's that like, oh my God, I yelled, or oh my God, I called the mom again and overparented. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. Yes.
unhealthy.
Yes. So, yeah. So I just think it, it's a big leap because it's so different from how we typically look at those firefighter parts and also I think mental illness too, where we sort of label a person as like, you are anxiety, you have
Mm,
depression, you are a person that this is part of who you are, versus like, there's just a part of you that,
mm.
yeah, just needs some healing and love and compassion. And it's not about, I mean, I think the other side of it is sometimes people are like, well, I'm not going to give myself a pass for all these things that I've done.
Yes.
And it's not that. It's not
Mhm,
that. We're not saying it doesn't matter that your firefighters jump in. It's like, let's better understand
mhm,
why they do what they do so we can heal what happened, whatever it was that activated them to
mhm.
go to this extreme. Because typically there's a pretty deeply held wound that's behind it.
For sure. For sure. And you had said earlier, like mindfulness you know, mindfulness is a word I'm not even really sure we pay much attention to, but it really is bringing it to front of mind, bringing it into consciousness. And we can't change what we don't
Yes.
see. And one way not to see things is with shame, because shame just keeps things secret. So if we just, you
Oh,
know, the next
yes.
moment after we scream at our kids, or after we overparent, or after we overdrink, or after we overeat, or after whatever, overshop, whatever we do, if
Yeah.
we go to that extreme mean voice, we're not able to learn that lesson. And I think that's really where I've come in midlife is speaking to that part where you're like, people think they won't change anything. I have had enough life experiences now where I'm like, no, that's how I change things. Like in bringing in that softer, more compassionate, I guess in parts work would be called the big S, like the big self, like the one,
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
Susie, who
Yeah.
was like, hey, honey, I know
Yeah.
you did that. That's probably not your best move, but let's look at why. Like, let's just like a
Right.
hug to
Yes.
oneself. Hmm.
Yeah. And one way to sort of identify where you are, like, am I in self or is this a different part, right? Like, is
Mm,
you're compassionate, you're caring, you have a lot of curiosity versus
mm,
judgment.
mm,
I think creativity comes into it. So there's 6 C's, which I'm not
mm,
remembering all of them, but care, compassion, creativity, curiosity,
hmm.
say kindness, even though that's okay. But yeah, there's
Right.
2 more which I'm not remembering.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that we are coming from that grounded, softer place
Okay.
that's really like to me, like your core, your soul, your heart.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. All right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I guess so you're saying those C's when we're doing one of those C's that sort of shows us that we're using the big self, not another.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and if you're y- typically, as you said, when if shame is popping up, that is another protective part to say that like you better shut this down. You can't let this part do this again. Like you should feel horrible about what you did versus like, oh, let's bring some compassion. Let's understand this. Yeah.
Mm, I
Yeah.
love
And
it.
it's not judgment around wherever you are, right? Like, because sometimes it's hard to access ourselves if we're really activated. It can be really
Mhm.
challenging. It's
Oh,
not
for
what we're
sure.
used to doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess one of the C's you mentioned was curiosity, which I feel like judgment and curiosity are the opposite side. Like I'm like, are you the judge in the courtroom or the detective? Like be the detective, because the judge is
Yeah.
just gonna be like, you're wrong.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've
Right. Shame on you.
right, shame on you. And then we don't go anywhere. And it's like, all right, so I'm wrong, but what do I do with that?
Right.
Not so
Right. Where
great.
do I go there?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if listeners are interested in learning more about parts work or learning, like how would you direct them to start, or give any
Yeah.
thing? help people
Well,
know.
there's the book I like. It's a little tiny book. I wish I had it right here in my hand, but it's called Introduction to Internal Family Systems. It's not very long. It's by Richard Schwartz, and it is just a nice, succinct sort of summary of parts work. You
Okay.
can go to the IFS Institute. That has all the books and trainings and videos and things there that are for sale, but also I think they have some free content there too. And I know I have not read it, so I can't speak to it, but I have colleagues who've read it, that Dick Schwartz's recent book, No Bad Parts,
Mhm.
is also a good resource
That's the
too.
one I have that I like. And I guess if
Yeah.
listeners are, they don't want to like go get more information, but they're like, no, I'm ready to start today, Biz. I'm thinking like just even journaling or just getting their thoughts out of their head and
Absolutely.
seeing maybe like which part is this speaking
Yeah.
or who does.
Yeah.
Sometimes I like looking at my thoughts and I'm like, who does this remind me of? Like my dad's message was so repeated and succinct over so many years that it's easy for me to be like, oh, that's my dad,
Yes.
like that. But then there are other voices that maybe are like, I don't even know, you can't put makeup on right. And I'm like, oh, that was like Cammy from like 7th grade. Like, do I still want that?
Yes.
Maybe just getting it out of their head, looking at
Yep.
their parts.
Sure. Journaling can help. They talk about mapping your parts so you can use artwork like creativity to
Oh,
see like what parts, and it doesn't even have to, it could just be color and shape, like this part. Like for me personally, I don't have very clear, like I don't have like, oh, this is a 7-year-old girl that, and I
hmm.
can probably figure that out, but like oftentimes my parts are more about a feeling, like a physical feeling that I have in my body. And
Mhm.
so slowing things down and like sort of either putting my hand on where I'm feeling it or just focusing my energy on where I feel that part in my body
Mm.
just opens up just space to hear it, to listen. um
Mm. Well, it's all those seeds,
Yeah,
the curiosity,
yeah,
the compassion that, yeah. Oh, I love that. I hadn't heard
yeah,
mapping your parts. I love that idea. So just sort of
yeah,
like getting
yeah.
some clarity. Because what I find, listeners, is that when I have some clarity, I can be more curious and compassionate. Like I have another part of me, I label her Mrs. Fenton, and I don't think Mrs. Fenton is listening to this podcast, but she was my English teacher, and she was so critical of my writing. And sometimes when I'm writing my blog posts or writing, notes for a
Oh,
podcast, the part of Mrs. Fenton will be in my head, and it's helpful for me to just sort of recognize that is not, the big S Susie, that is
yeah,
Mrs. Fenton here, and she's here to be a protector to make sure that I don't put out crap quality to but
exactly.
let's,
She's your quality control.
right,
Yep,
she's my
yep.
quality control. Thank you, Mrs. Fenton. You step down. Like we don't need to be at the table today. But
Yeah,
I like the idea of mapping them out. I can be a sort of visual person. And so, again, what I'm hearing from you and what my listeners know from me, like there is no right way to do that. You could do it with colors, you can do it with feelings, or you can be like, this is my,
yeah.
for me, Mrs. Fenton was 4th grade. So 4th grade,
Oh, yes. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it can be, yeah, whatever works for you. Like it's really you know, in my own personal therapy work, which is because I'm a trauma survivor, it's very trauma focused. Like we are staying with that wounded part once we find it until it's fully healed and releasing. So what can happen is really beautiful. It's like because these wounded parts carry these burdens. I am worthless. I am unlovable. Some of these very core beliefs, and they carry these. And when we can release those burdens, that part then shifts the job it does, right? That part then can change how it feels in your system. It's lighter. It's um yeah, I had a very lonely part that has sort of become almost like this may sound sort of weird, but like a spiritual guide for my other parts. Like it's there watching and there and present in the healing of other parts. And it's really just such a not something I would have expected, but it's a really beautiful
Mm,
process.
I love that. Yeah. So allow it's like the part sort of grows up and
Yes.
changes and
Yes.
is wounded. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you, Biz. Thank you for coming on today. And where
Oh,
should I direct
sure.
listeners because they will want more Biz?
Well, you can find me through either my therapy site, but I'm only licensed in a couple of states in the United States, but that's progressioncounseling.com or elizabethcushcoaching.com. And parts work can be brought into coaching too. We may not be doing the heavy lifting of trauma work, but we can definitely work with parts there too. So, but I'm on Instagram. That's my podcast, Awaken Your Wise Woman, and I'm on LinkedIn. So
Okay, I
you
will
can
put
find me in all
all
those
those
places.
links in the show notes and definitely want to, as I started the show saying, I started listening to Biz's podcast a while ago. And so I definitely want to highlight that under what she just said.
Mm,
Her podcast is outstanding and
thank
has
you.
lots of great resources in there. So thank you for coming on today, Biz.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, Susie. This has been great.